Funding for the post-production of Lost Treasures of Christianity, the Ancient Monuments of Armenia, was made possible by Vahak and Paris Hazmeg-Havnanian.
Across the territory of Armenia, some of the world's most ancient churches hold clues to an age-old architectural puzzle. Did the construction techniques used in Armenia enable the construction of the great cathedrals of Europe?
The Armenians solved the problems of building in stone. Stone ceilings, stone domes, and walls, and in such a way so that the domes wouldn't come crashing down.
The existence of these ancient structures has led generations of art historians to ponder their meaning. Armenia became the first nation to adopt Christianity as its official state religion fewer than 300 years after the death of Christ. Until the Iron Curtain fell, most Western scholars had problems getting to these ancient Armenian monuments. This is the story of one scholar's crusade to keep many of Armenia's most treasured monuments from being lost, forgotten, and misunderstood.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Armenian Library and Museum of America, the Bank Boston Charitable Foundation, the Louise Manuelian Simone Foundation, and Jack Kalajian Darien. Additional funding was provided by Ralph Marion and the Stephen Philibosian Foundation.
And Dr. Evans for all your labors.
Since the 1970s, Tufts University art history professor Lucy de Manuelian has shared her passion for Armenian art and architecture with audiences worldwide.
In 4 words, simply the Armenians and Byzantium. I described the art and architecture as a kind of lost treasure, sort of lost and forgotten until relatively recently by the West. Everyone became enthralled, and I felt very happy because many of them said that, the lecture has opened their eyes to a different part of the world, a part of the world they hadn't known anything about, and to different periods of history that were important for Western civilization.
At its peak, Armenia bridged continents, bounded on the west by the Mediterranean Sea and on the east by the Caspian. Invasions by Byzantines, Persians, Arabs, Seljuks, Mongols, and Ottoman Turks changed her borders considerably, leaving present-day Armenia with a small fraction of her original territory.
I got interested in medieval art and architecture of Western Europe and, France and England. I was sitting in on courses at Harvard, and I kept running across these footnotes about Armenian art and architecture. And it was very surprising to me because I had never run across any mention of Armenian art and architecture in any of the textbooks on the history of art. And I began to realize that on the basis of what the footnotes said, that some more research in the field of Armenian art and architecture might answer some of the most important, unanswered, and haunting questions in the history of medieval art. For example, one question is, where did the medieval architects of Western Europe learn the building techniques that made it possible for them to build those towering Gothic cathedrals? And then some of the footnotes said that some scholars were convinced that there was a connection between Armenian architecture, which the building techniques there were developed and used centuries earlier, at least as early as the 5th century. I thought, this is amazing. I've never read about any of this in any of the art history books I had read earlier. And I thought, why not pursue this field? The specific monastery that I was studying for my dissertation was the monastery of Gerhard. And I picked it because it has some very puzzling sculpture on the outside. It's got animals, a lion and a bull fighting, and it's got peacocks in the front, and my job was try to figure out what all this meant. It's such a fascinating monastery because tradition has it that Gregory the Illuminator, the person who brought Christianity to Armenia, founded the monastery. It's one of the most important pilgrimage centers. Gerhard means the lance, and presumably someone brought a piece of the lance which pierced the side of Christ. It was destroyed by the Arabs in the 10th century, and then was liberated in the late 12th and early 13th century by the Zacharid brothers. And when they liberated the territory and saw the ruins of the monastery, they began rebuilding it. The first church was this main church, and then in the 1240s, Prince Prush bought the monastery for his family. And that's what's so interesting about these monasteries, that they belong to princely families. And they use them as their administrative center and cultural center, and there would be schools built there, and also manuscripts copied there. In here, there is not only the main church standing, but when Prince Prush bought it in the 1240s, he had 4 chambers hollowed out of the cliff that look as though they were built from the ground up with all of this intricate decoration, and yet it was just carved out of the cliff. Around the surrounding cliffs, you have these rectangular slabs of stone with a large cross carved in the front of it and various ornamentation carved as a frame for it. And these were an Armenian art creation. They're not just gravestones, but they were stones that commemorated something, maybe the finishing of the monastery, or in some cases, the end of a battle. And then along the cliffs, you find these doorways, and they were part of that early habitation of the monastery. They were monks' cells.
Part of what drew Professor de Manuelian to her expertise in Armenian art was the thought that it might answer the most important questions in medieval art. She also recalls childhood stories about Armenian history. Her godfather was also an authority on the architectural history of Armenia. Around the turn of the century, he traveled across present-day Turkey, documenting and sketching the ruins of Ani, the city that served as a capital of Armenia in the Middle Ages.
My godfather was Arshak Fetvajan, and he had been trained in Italy and practiced in St. Petersburg. He was a member of the academy. But he began going to Armenia. He participated in the excavations of the ruined capital of Armenia, the city of Ani, and spent 20 years of his life sketching the medieval Armenian churches and making thousands of detail sketches of the architectural sculpture, watercolors of the monuments at Ani. And when the Republic of Armenia was invaded by Turkey and Russia, Fetvajan had to come west. When he came to Paris, the Museum of Decorative Arts of the Louvre exhibited his watercolors of Ani, and there was great praise for them. And then in London, the Victoria and Albert Museum exhibited his paintings, and the Royal Society of Architects. When he came to the United States, he had those with him. He didn't have much money at all. And there was interest on the part of Harvard to publish his sketches and his watercolors, but there weren't enough funds to do this. And by the time my godfather died, when he was 80 years old, over 80 years old, his heart was broken because this information hadn't been published. I, as a child, knew only that my godfather had done something very important for the history of Armenian art and architecture, but I didn't know the details. So suddenly the intellectual interest coincided with this emotional bond, and if I had started out to kind of fulfill my godfather's mission, I couldn't have done it in a better way, but I did it unknowingly from the other direction. But I also think that some of the problems I had to face in the Soviet Union, I was able to surmount because there was this emotional bond. When I finished the coursework, I had to go to Armenia to photograph the churches and study them, research them, do some field work. I had taken something like 60 rolls of film with me. I had 2 cameras, 4 lenses, and no experience in taking pictures. The black and white photographs were going to be developed in the Polytechnic Institute, but the color, the Soviet Union did not have the Kodak color process. Armenia didn't have it. I had asked the American embassy in Moscow, what we could do about it, and they said, well, if you were in Moscow, you would give it to us. We would send the films by diplomatic pouch outside the country to the United States, because the Soviets had a rule you could not export exposed film. And so the fact I wasn't in Moscow made me try another avenue, and that is that I used to hang around the hotels, the tourist hotels, the 2 or 3 in Yerevan. And anybody who looked American and spoke English with an American accent, I would go up to and say, I'm not a spy. I'm a graduate student from the United States. I'm doing a dissertation on art history. And, I wondered if you would be willing to carry out just 2 or 3 rolls of film to the outside. I've got them in prepaid mailers. And, invariably they were trusting. And they would take my film and they'd get back to the United States, mail it, and the pictures would get back to my house where somebody looked at them.
While her subject was mainly studied by scholars behind the Iron Curtain, the end of the Cold War opened the Armenian architectural record to scrutiny by more scholars worldwide. Der Manuelian continues her own research and fieldwork inside Armenia, since 1991 an independent republic.
This is the church of Ervart, and early 14th century, and another reason why I took up the study of Armenian architectural sculpture, because on the front of this church, over the western doorway, you've got a portrait of the Madonna and Child, and beside their portrait is John the Baptist, there at the very top, sort of perched on the arms of the cross. But then when you look further down, what you have is a lion on one side, in the base of the cross, and a bull on the other. And the question is, why in heaven's name do they have animals on the outsides of these churches? You can just see on the eastern side of this church, you've got one animal flat